Welcome to the Wellness as a Way of Life podcast, your one-stop, all-encompassing source of wellness, knowledge, wisdom, inspiration, and motivation. Here we teach you why not all wellness trends are for you, how to figure out which ones are, how to best adapt them for your personal wellness toolbox, and how ultimately to integrate your wellness practices so fully that they become to feel like brushing your teeth. A foundational part of who you are and not a check mark on your to-do list. This week on the podcast, I am so excited to introduce to you a dear friend of mine who I met on the plant-powered Italia retreat in Tuscany earlier this year. His name is Michael O'Brien, and he is a qualified meditation teacher, executive coach, endurance athlete, and creator of the Pause, Breathe, Reflect, Meditation, and Gratitude app. It's so amazing. You have to download the app. He loves helping people accomplish hard things through mindfulness. He's a survivor of a horrific near-death cycling accident called his last bad day and years in the corporate executive suite. And in 2022, he used the power of mindfulness to ride his bike across the United States. So we are so excited to dive right into this conversation and soak up a bit of Michael's incredible mindfulness and wisdom around breath work, and really just how important it is to pause, take a moment, and reflect. Let's dive in. Hey, Michael, welcome to the podcast. I'm so thrilled to have you here today. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm grateful. I'm eager to step into the conversation with you. So thanks for having me on. It's the relationship I formed with you back when we first met in Italy was one of the gems from our retreat in Italy. So I'm psyched that we get to spend some time here today.
Oh, thanks, Michael. That means a lot. I was actually going to start the conversation saying something to the similar effect. I just had a sense upon meeting you, even though you were kind of dripping out exactly who you were and what you did little by little, I really felt a connection with you immediately. So the feeling is mutual. I would love for you to tell us a little bit about when meditation, breath work, mindfulness really became important in your life. Was there sort of a catalyst moment, or was it more of a progression? Your story.
Yeah, so there definitely was a moment, and then it's been a steady progression over the last, I'd say, 22 years. So I'll take everyone back to 2001. I was a few months into a recovery from a crazy cycling accident. I got hit head on by a Ford Explorer. Lucky to be alive. Doctors didn't know how I survived. They told my wife, "Hey, listen, he should just be lucky to be here." And they painted a pretty grim picture of my life because I broke a whole bunch of everything, like what was going to be in store for me, all that jazz.
Mm.
And I tried to put on this really happy, optimistic, persona, we got this, we can do this. But deep inside, I was a hot mess. I was so overwhelmed. I didn't know what to do. My identity had been tipped upside down and poured out. So I was really sort of starting from nothing. And I had this moment in a physical rehab session. I just looked around. It was a pretty low moment. I started to cry, and I was just struggling, just like the littlest things, like getting out of my wheelchair and onto the physical rehab mat that took a lot of calories, a lot of thought. And I had this moment where I just started really just bawling. And my physical therapist said, "Why don't you take a moment?" And I looked around the whole rehab center, and I saw patients getting better and some not getting better. And I was like, okay, what's the deal? Why are they getting better and I'm not getting better? Hello, comparison. And then something spoke to me and said, "You know what, Michael, just take a breath, slow it down." I've always been an athlete, and that was the advice that my coaches would give to any of us if like we had a big moment, like take a breath, slow it down. So the next day, I got out of my hospital bed into my wheelchair and I wheeled myself to a quiet place in the hospital and I did a box breathing pattern. And that was the beginning. And so I did it for about 5 minutes. And I was like, okay, that felt pretty good. Like I was like, okay, I got this day. I set my intentions for the day. And then I did another one later in the afternoon because I had 2 rehab sessions every day. And then that became a pattern and they became my little pause, breathe, reflect breaks that I would take. And then eventually I found mindfulness-based stress reduction by John Kabat-Zinn. And that really spoke to my scientific side of me, where like mindfulness could be medicine. And that's how the journey all started. And learning from different teachers along the way and developing my own practice. And it's still with me today.
Such a powerful story. I'm curious, you like immediately, so I did this boxed breathing exercise. Had you been taught that and it just didn't resonate before, or where did that come from? That was something that they had incorporated into your rehab, or it was just something that you thread in?
I put that thread in. I'll be honest, like in the early days of all this, I wouldn't tell anyone. Like it took me almost like 15 years to tell anyone I was doing any of this. Because in the very beginning, I was like, this mindfulness meditation thing, this is like wackadoo. Like, like only crazy people do this. Like, keep in mind at the time, I was a corporate leader. I was like, I was doing that whole thing. Like I was wearing a suit and tie to work every day. It was 2001, right? This is before the internet. And I was like, no, like this is how we do business. Rah, 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 you know? And so none of this soft stuff had a place. But I knew enough as an athlete, your breath is super important. And so what my memory says is that I read something about box breathing. I think it actually comes from the U.S. Marines or the Navy SEAL team. They would do it, and I was like, okay, they're really tough, so that's sort of tough. I'll do that. I wasn't doing loving kindness meditation in the very beginning, like which I do now as a staple. So that's how it all started. Was like I was a reluctant participant, but I was so overwhelmed. I was like, what do I have to lose? Like, I got to figure out something. I got to get out of this hospital. I really wanted to just go back home. And so as the story sort of unfolds, I wanted to get back home, but the real home I was going to was like deep within me, like the home of your heart. That's what I've discovered along the way. But yeah, I put that in there, but I would not tell a soul. It was working. And I kept it a secret. I got out of the hospital, went back to my corporate job, didn't tell anyone because I didn't want anyone to think, oh, wow, that accident really messed with Michael's brain. And now he's doing this meditation soft stuff. I think he's lost his edge. I didn't want any of that. So I kept it all to myself really until we got to the pandemic.
Wow, that's okay. I didn't know that part of the story. I mean, I think you mentioned initially that, it wasn't something that you were screaming from the rooftops, but yeah. So what was the science that did speak to you back then or that currently speaks to you?
Yeah. So right now I'd say my practice is probably a mixture of the scientific study of it, as well as the spiritual aspects of it, and just the fact that it's so time tested in a world that seems to want to chase after the new hack or the shortcut. Like, hey, this whole thing called a contemplative practice meditation, it's been around for about 25 to 2,700 years. I think it's sticking around for a little bit longer. So I spent my corporate life in healthcare. So traditional like healthcare study designs. And mindfulness-based stress reduction was a practice that John Kabat-Zinn embedded into the University of Massachusetts Medical Center as a modality to help people with pain and depression and anxiety. And so they had some really strong clinical evidence that it worked relative to not doing anything, or nowadays, even to some very common pharmaceutical treatments that many people know of. So that was the start of it. He wrote this book, Full Catastrophe Living, that walked through his whole MBSR for short practice. And that's what I started doing. So now I still buy into the scientific evidence. There's a little bit of me that still wants some data, but I can tap into my intuition and just sort of the whole spiritual connection to, your breath and, Mother Earth, nature, and all that jazz. So there's I think a good healthy mixture. My practice is still mainly though secular, because what I'm trying to do is speak to people who were much like me back in 2001. They're like, I've heard about it because more people have heard about it nowadays, but I don't know. I have my doubts, and I try to say, hey, listen, let's give it a try. What do you have to lose? You slow it down a little bit, you relax, you connect with your breath. It's not easy, but it can be really meaningful in terms of how you live your life. So I try to make it really approachable. So I don't want to get too spiritual, because I think in some circles, especially as I'm trying to bring this into more corporate environments, the spirituality piece, we can lose people right up front. So I go in with a very practical approach, and then I backdoor all the other stuff that we might really get into, you and I, current day, but a lot of people in corporate life would be like, that's a little soft, or that's a little too gushy for me. So we take it bit by bit.
Yeah, well, I want to get a little bit more into that in your experience and what you're seeing and experiencing there. But can you sort of parse out, because I think it's really important that people feel like they have options and that they don't need to be doing all the things all the time to have, a better life, to see results, or however you want to look at it. But so for you personally, like, how do you define or differentiate mindfulness, meditation, breath work?
Yeah, so great question. So I think breath work can be a wonderful way to use your breath. Again, can be the great body regulator. And it can do a lot of really cool things. It can amp you up when you need to get amped up, right? There's ways to do that. We've both practiced holotropic breathing together, and that can be a really mind-blowing, trippy experience for some. We can
Incredible.
use we can use the breath to slow things down, to let go of stress. We can also use the breath to help us develop greater focus and awareness. So breath work, and I see that as like a multi-tool instrument where you can use the power of your breath to, bring forward qualities that you want in your life in current moment. Mindfulness I see as a much more like a bigger umbrella. It's like almost a way of living. So it's not just sitting in lotus position with the focus on the breath. You can bring mindfulness to your eating. There's mindful eating. You can have a mindful walking practice. Really, for me, mindfulness is about that paying attention on purpose with sort of openness and creativity to what is unfolding in your life. So there's that, again, that awareness piece of it, but it's a much bigger umbrella. Meditation then is another tool, maybe sitting alongside of breath work, where you can have different meditative practices. You can have TM, you can have a mindful meditation where you focus in on the breath. You can also do really wonderful practices like a body scan, which is a daily practice for me, as well as like loving kindness, which is one of the four immeasurables when you tie it back to Buddhist underpinnings. So meditation is another form of it, of using our breath, but also we can also use sensations in the body, soundscape, even thought or feeling tones. So there's different ways to use meditation to bring in maybe more mindfulness in your life. So that's how I look at all three of those. I think they all have, one's a big umbrella, and then meditation and breath work to me sort of fit under that to live more mindfully. My big thing is, let's take what we're doing maybe on a cushion or on a mat. Could be, you can have mindful movement too, which sort of somewhat relates to yoga, but not the same. So bringing all these practices that we do in a lot of ways transactionally, maybe in the morning as a great morning routine. And I'm inviting people to take that and weave it into their day as a way of living. I want to encourage people to mindfully live and bring mindfulness to almost everything that they do, including driving, which if my driver was mindfully driving, we may not be sitting here today. Again, my accident was crazy, a lot of pain and suffering. Super glad that it happened because it opened doors that it never would have opened if I hadn't gone through that. But still, he could have been a more mindful driver.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I love that you mentioned, mindfulness as an umbrella. I agree, bringing it into, I would argue any movement practice. I know you as an athlete, I'm sure that you have moments that you're a little bit more intentional about paying attention to, how are my muscles, what's feeling good, how's my posture, and breathing and all these things. But also the day-to-day of, I invite clients when they're getting ready in the morning, just being a little bit more loving in the way that you're applying things or getting dressed, the way that you're cooking, whether you're infusing love and patience and positive vibes into what you're preparing, all these things.
Yeah.
I'd love to know, so when you're, so what are you seeing in the corporate setting now that you have painted that you have this, 20-year spectrum of experience? How is it different? Is it different at all? Are you cautious? You sort of bring in maybe something that's, well, I guess, would you define meditation being less secular and breath work more secular, or not necessarily? I'm sure you have a way to present all these things so that they're, not, there's no knee-jerk reaction right off the bat.
Yeah. Well, so I tend to accept the knee-jerk reaction because it's usually there. It's, it's part of our bias. So I will dive into the answer to your question, but I do want to acknowledge what you just shared. Yeah, movement of any type. Like when I ride my bike, I'm about to ride my bike across New York State. And so I'll do it on gravel roads in nature, which is part of who we are. And I don't listen to anything. There's no podcast in my ear. There's no music. It's just me, the breath, nature, the sound of the gravel, trying to bring all my senses into it. So so any type of movement can really matter. And I loved what you shared about just getting ready in the morning. I think one moment in every morning that I think can be filled with judgment is that moment we step out of the shower and we look in the mirror. Like we're literally naked, and then we tend to beat ourselves up and judge ourselves. And I think that is a tender moment that we tend to blow past a lot. We either sit and ruminate about the flaws of our body, or we just move past it. But it can be this wonderful, tender moment where we pour a little compassion and grace into ourselves. To look at our body with all its perfect and imperfect qualities, it's all of our kintsugi, our scars, and really embrace, like, this body has done so much for us, even when it doesn't necessarily work all that well for us. So I just wanted to acknowledge what you said. It was like, I loved it. So in terms of the corporate environment, through the pandemic, a lot of HR departments are like, well, we got to give people something to deal with their mental health. And I think one of the great byproducts of the pandemic was we're now talking about mental health more than ever. It's more commonplace. I still think we have a long way to go, right? So, and I worry that now that we're trying to get back to quote unquote normal, we might blow past that. We can forget the empathy that we had as we dealt with our mental and emotional well-being. I still think we need to have a larger conversation about what we experienced during the pandemic, and how do we want to live going forward? But that's it for another podcast. So a lot of HR departments then would give like mental health tools, like even apps. So I'm like, oh yeah, we offer that to to our, not our patients, but to our employees. And I don't think they're really truly embracing it. It's like one of those cool things they put up on a slide to say, hey, we're doing something, but it's not part of how they're working.
Mm-hmm.
But I do see it starting to change a bit. I do have many corporate clients who are willing to carve out like a half an hour once a week, not much, to say, okay, we're going to find a moment just to breathe. And people can come in and I lead them through a meditation.
Mm.
So I'm starting to see more of that where they they want to take it from, well, this is what we're offering, the transactional nature of a lot of this stuff, and say we want to be working this way together. Like the how we're working is going to help us establish um, structure and values so we can deliver on our why better. So it's starting to change. I would have to say that men are still lagging far behind. A lot of men are like, it seems like a feminine thing to do, right? It's still, with most men, it still seems a bit soft. But slowly but surely, I see more men coming around to it to say, hey, listen, I want to acknowledge that I've been dealing with a lot of stress, a lot of pain, and I need some better tools. So I do see that starting to turn. So it's slow work. I thought the pandemic would accelerate it a bit, and in some circles it probably has, but there's still a little bit of like, yeah, but we got work to do. And what I'm trying to share with people is like, if you slow down just a bit, it will help you be more thoughtful as you approach your work, and you will end up going faster because there won't be so many things getting in your way. So yeah, I know you want to plow forward, but you can't jump over every boulder, over every fence. That's slowing you down downstream, to mix metaphors all around. So if you just slow down a bit and be more thoughtful, you as a business can go faster, and there'd be a stronger culture, more community, if you will, more a greater sense of belonging. And I think that will eventually help everyone create a more of a win-win-win type of situation.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to get your thoughts because you're, deeply entrenched in both worlds, the extreme athletic and the mindfulness. So, sort of from a traditional standpoint, or maybe let's just stay with the corporate, it's completely acceptable to be doing something that in extreme sport. And most people would understand that in order for that to be a sustainable thing, there's an ebb and flow and intensity, and that you're resting and, the softness, if you will, at some point. So do you see that is an area to sort of help men in particular understand, like, you can't just go without stopping?
Yeah, I do think, like, in the corporate world, they love their sports analogies. And hey, when I was in the corporate world, I threw out a couple of them as well. And they'll invite ex-athletes to be keynote speakers and talk about drive and tenacity and teamwork. And the real good speakers that they bring in will also talk about recovery and rest and all that jazz. Like, you can't stay at peak performance forever. The greatest athletes, peak for key events during the course of the year. They can't be at the tip of the spear the whole year. So while corporate America, just corporations across the globe, love their sports analogies, they haven't yet met or like made that link to like, okay, maybe we should steal some of these other practices that athletes do. In some circles, yes, but we still have a bit of a gap there. And I do think it's a way to help, in particular, men, because men still, I do a lot of work in the diversity, equity, and belonging space. Men still hold a lion's share of the key executive leadership positions. So if we can get them to see the importance of working hard when we need to work hard, but also recovering maybe even harder, and that's how we get better, faster, stronger, if you will. So I still think we can make that link and close that gap. We haven't done it yet, but I'm
Yeah, I think
optimistic
it
that we
helps that
can.
it's coming more public that the military uses meditation, as you pointed out, the Navy SEALs. I know other, like the Canadian Special Ops, practice yoga, Pilates, meditation, like all these, softer feminine things. And they're very clear that they need them. I mean, there's no issue there. It's just a given. I think it needs to come around to that around in other circles.
Absolutely. I think the more we can put that out there, and part of how I see my role, like I'm coming from corporate life, and
Mm-hmm.
what my part of my story is like, hey, listen, the unexpected happened to me. And so part of my mindfulness practice helped me deal when the unexpected happens. And so you can hopefully deal with it with more grace. And it put me in this position today where I was able to ride my bike across the country and be a really strong athlete at my age. And I'm still going, right? I'm still riding my bike and still competing and all that jazz. So there's a little bit of like tragic story, right? Rock bottom story, if you will. Um, Pretty accomplished athlete, but also coming from the corporate executive suite and also coming at it as a white dude, right? So,
I'll
and
call that out. Yeah.
yeah, because, and I do think that's part of my responsibility too, just to bring more belonging. I think more white men need to speak up about creating cultures of belonging and not have it be performative, which right now it largely is. So my hope is that sometimes the message, the message is out there, but the messenger is just changed enough where it can resonate. So part of my goal is, and I don't necessarily cater only to men. I try to cater to all the like-hearted humans out there. But I'm hoping that more folks in corporate America will pick up on the message because I've come from a corporate environment. I had a team of close to 1,000 people. I checked the whole athletic crazy guy box, and I have this practice that helped me get through, another check the box, crazy life altering story. So I remain very optimistic, and this is my life's work going forward. I do believe that when I came out of my accident and recovery, so many people said, this happened for a reason. I'm like, okay, what's the reason? Like, who's going to tell me what the reason is? Like, do I get an email about this or do they send a text? Does current
Where's the
language,
memo?
does someone slide into my DMs and give me the reason? And I, at first I struggled with that. Like, what is the reason? Current day, I know the reason today is to deliver this message about the importance of living mindfully for overall health, but also just better community, find a way to, again, bring like-heartedness into the world, but be open to different mindedness. So if we can come from a really good place in our heart, perhaps, this is my hope, we can be open to different ways of thinking, and that can lead to better conversations. And we can get past all this division that we're currently dealing with.
Beautiful. Do you want to quickly tell us about your app? I'm really enjoying it. You've got such a great mindful voice.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. So it's a lot of fun to do. It's like a really creative way. What I love about the app too is that people can, send me a message and say, I really need a meditation for this. And then I record the meditation for them on that. So it's, the app is being co-created, which is really cool. So the name of the app is Pause, Breathe, Reflect, which ties back to how I labeled my, first meditative sessions. Pause is key because I'm not saying stop, because I tend to cater to a lot of like type A personalities that want to go. The breath obviously is important, but the reflection piece is that moment to be thoughtful about how do I want to show up next? What kind of ripple do I want to put out into the world? And I really designed it for people who claim that they don't have time to do this. So a lot of people have come to me and said, like, my morning routine is already crazy enough. I got things to do. I don't have 10 minutes to meditate. I want to, but I don't. And I'm like, cool, I'll meet you where you're at. If you don't have 10 minutes in the morning, I bet you have 5 times during the day where you can take 2 minutes, or maybe 10 times where you can take a minute. So I'll take my 10 minutes anywhere in the day that you want to place them. But I believe in frequency, that if you have the discipline to show up each day, but you frequently come back to a mindful way of living, that's how we develop a really healthy habit. And when that happens, then we put a better ripple out into the world. Energetically, we show up differently. And I think we can bring about some of the change that we, hopefully most of us, seek in the world. For me, I just want the world to be more peaceful. And so 1 minute at a time is sort of the notion to bring mindfulness to our everyday moments. And I think those moments make life rich and exciting.
Yes. Perfect. Let's end it there. Anything else you wanted to share before we hop off? I'm excited to share. You've graciously offered a link where they can sign up for your app. And anything else, any other way that you want people to connect with you?
So they can connect with me on Instagram for the corporate souls out there. I'm on LinkedIn. But those are the 2 platforms I spend probably most of my time with. I've tried to cut down on my social platforms just to have a little bit more space for openness. But no, this was awesome, Megan. I love it. I love what you're putting out into the world. The world needs your vibe and energy and your wisdom. So I'll encourage you to keep doing what you're doing. And if you're listening, follow Megan. She's got a lot of wisdom to give. So, but thank you for having me on. So a great continuation of our first meeting in Italy and to current day.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Michael. Hey there. One last thing I wanted to share with you. If you're enjoying this podcast, it would mean so much to me if you could rate and review it on your favorite podcast platform. It really does help us grow the show. And this being so important to me to get this message out to more women, to help them optimize their wellness and ultimately their lives. This is my mission, and I would greatly appreciate it if you could support the podcast by rating and reviewing. Thanks in advance. Have a good one.